Hello. Let's talk about the Faberge eggs. So in preparing for this, I read three wonderful books. This is Faberge's Eggs, written by Tony Faber, who is a descendant of the man himself. Lovely book, very informative. Then I read these two by the same author, Gezer von Habsburg, who is perhaps the world's leading authority on the Faberge eggs. So this one, Faberge Fantasies and Treasures, full of wonderful pictures. And then this one, Faberge, Court Jeweler to the Czars. It's more of a catalogue. It's got very beautiful photographs in it. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen and we'll get into it. So, who was Peter Karl Faberge? So not too much is known about him because he was a very shy person and he detested the limelight. In fact, this is one of about only three photographs of him that exist because he had been photographed. So the Faberge family was originally from France, but his grandfather moved to Russia because they were Protestants, Huguenots, and at that time they were being persecuted in France, and so they fled to Russia. And his father Gustav was born in Russia. The name Faberge has the root word Faber, which means smith or artisan. It is also the root word for fabricate. And that is what the Faberge family had always done. His father Gustav owned a basement jewelry shop in St. Petersburg, and that is where Peter Karl Faberge was born on May 18th, 1846. He was very well educated, and he studied jewelry design. He was also very well traveled and a bit of a cultural sponge, and so he brought back all the knowledge from his travels to St. Petersburg, and it would color his creations of the future. He was 24 years old in 1870 when he took over the family business. He really was an extraordinary businessman. He never actually made anything with his own hands, but he was an impresario and he hand-selected teams of extremely talented jewelers and craftsmen to create his designs. He had over 300 jewelers and craftsmen in St. Petersburg and 200 in Moscow. It's remarkable because enterprises of that size simply did not exist in Russia at that time. He was a trailblazer. And for a jeweler, he didn't care too much about precious stones. His real interest was in the design or in the artistic value of his creations. He is quoted as saying, "Expensive things interest me little if the value is merely in diamonds and pearls." At that time, the jewelry and style in St. Petersburg was very ostentatious, and yet Faberge preferred simplicity, but he was so good at his craft that he single-handedly changed the taste of St. Petersburg. No easy feat. In a 1914 interview, he was asked, "How do you see your position in comparison to your competitors abroad?" His response, "Tiffany, Cartier, and Boucheron are people of commerce. I am the artist jeweler. You can spend 1,000,000 rubles and buy from them. But if you want something artistic, I'm the man." And while he's mostly remembered today for the Imperial Faberge eggs, he did a lot more than that. He also created personal jewels for the Imperial family. I'm going to share pictures of that with you guys at the end of this. And when they were traveling abroad, they got him to make a gift that they gave to world leaders. It was a global phenomenon. The Imperial family traveled with suitcases full of Faberge products. His creations went as far as the court of Siam, which is now Bangkok, the Emperor of Japan, the Emperor of China, and even the Indian Maharajas. His creations were used in international diplomacy, and even to this day, the Imperial Faberge eggs are often sent ahead of Russian presidents during state visits. And so they go to the country the president of Russia is going to be visiting, and they're displayed there until he arrives. And then following his visit, he takes the eggs with him back to Russia. So how did Faberge come to create the imperial eggs for the Romanovs? So this began in the 1860s when he very cleverly insinuated himself into the good graces of the Russian imperial cabinet. The cabinet controlled all the contracts that the imperial family gave out. And so if you wanted your work seen by the Tsar and his family or sold to the imperial family, then you ingratiated yourself to the cabinet. And so Faberge offered his services to the imperial cabinet for 15 long years for free. He restored jewels at the Hermitage, and he even produced things for the cabinet members, all for free, for those 15 long years. Then in the 1870s, a group of treasure hunting aristocrats discovered some 4th century Scythian treasures near the Black Sea. This treasure. And they presented these to Tsar Alexander III. And Faberge worked on restoration of these 2,000-year-old treasures, and he did an excellent job. Now, the centerpiece was this spectacular gold bangle. So spectacular. The French government wanted to borrow it for an exhibition in Paris, but the royal curator for the imperial family said that it was too valuable to ever leave Russian soil. And so several jewelers in Russia were given contracts to make replicas of this bangle. But Faberge made such a perfect replica that experts could not even tell the difference between the replica he made and the original. So in 1881, he got the Tsar's permission to recreate replicas of the entire Scythian treasure and to hold an exhibition of those replicas. And the exhibition, which was held in 1882, was a monumental success. Even the imperial family attended the exhibition. And in fact, the Tsarina Maria Feodorovna bought a pair of cufflinks from Faberge during this exhibition. And this was his first contact with them. Now, let's talk about the eggs themselves. So, it's not as if the Tsar had been giving the Tsarina hard-boiled eggs at Easter, and then one year he decided, oh, darling, this year you're going to get Faberge. He'd given her jeweled eggs before, but he wanted something really particular that year. In a letter he wrote to his brother Vladimir 3 days before Easter, he said, quote, I am grateful to you, dear Vladimir, for the trouble you have taken in placing the order for the execution of the order itself. I do hope the egg will have the desired effect on its future owner. And the letter is dated March 21st, 1885. So what effect did he want the owner of the egg to have? So let's talk about the people involved. This is Tsar Alexander III. He had originally been the heir to the throne. His older brother Nicholas was the heir, the Tsarevich. But following the death of his brother Nicholas, he was elevated to Tsarevich. He was a very simple man. He woke up at 7 a.m. every day, and he had rye bread with an egg for breakfast, and then he resumed work at his offices. His family resided at the most uncomfortable apartments of the Gachina Palace. It had very low ceilings. His wife hated living there. He made sure his children slept in army beds with hard pillows. He didn't want them growing up soft, even though they were surrounded by luxury. He found nothing more relaxing than an afternoon spent chopping wood or a night of fishing. He enjoyed the simple, ordinary things. He was exceptionally strong. In fact, there was this time when the imperial carriage of a train that his family was traveling in had crashed, and he lifted the train car with his bare hands so that his family could escape the wreckage. And it's suspected that this could have been one of the things that contributed to his premature death at age 49. So he was a very simple man. Now let's talk about his wife, the recipient of the Faberge eggs, Marie Feodorovna. She was originally Dagmar of Denmark, a Danish princess, even though she was born into a relatively poor family. And she only came to prominence because the king of Denmark at that time, who was Frederick VII, was childless. And so he had adopted her father as his heir. And so when her father became King Christian IX, her sister married Edward VII and became Queen Alexandra of the United Kingdom. So she lived in relative poverty until age 5, and she always remembered how lucky she was. And for this reason, she lived life very fully. She was a very vivacious and sociable person. She loved parties, she loved jewelry, she loved dancing. She reveled in her good fortune because she knew how lucky she was. And by age 16, this girl who had grown up relatively poor was engaged to the Tsarevich, the heir to the Russian throne. They were madly in love, and they recited poetry to each other, and they scratched their names on the windows of the castle in Denmark where they had met. They used diamonds. It was common practice, apparently. But that fiancé was not the one she ended up marrying. He was her husband's late brother, Nicholas. Nicholas and Dagmar. So Nicholas had died from meningitis. He'd been thrown from a horse, and he just never recovered. And Dagmar promised him on his deathbed that she would marry his brother Alexander instead. And Alexander was also actually madly in love with someone else, Princess Marie Mepchersky. But out of their sense of duty, Dagmar and Alexander married each other. And so in 1886, Dagmar converted to Orthodoxy and took the name Marie Feodorovna. She was a very charming woman, very charismatic. And the Russians just loved her because she embraced Russian culture. She spoke Russian very fluently, and she loved to dance the mazurka at imperial balls. She also loved showing off her tiaras, her earrings, chokers, necklaces, the works. She loved jewelry. They had 6 children together, and her son Nicholas, Nicky, was the heir to the throne. So Alexander III, for security reasons, had moved the family to Gachina Palace. His father had been assassinated, and then he and his wife were constantly receiving terrorist threats. She would find notes on her coffee table in her own private apartments. And so she was often very unhappy and homesick. Because if these people could find a way to get these threatening notes into her bedchamber, or to stop them from getting, poison or getting an assassin in, to her, private chambers. So she lived in constant fear. The family had even received a dagger amongst their Easter gifts. And the same group that sent them the dagger had sent dynamite to the Moscow police, hidden in a basket of eggs, with a note that said, quote, "We have plenty more for the coronation." So she lived in a constant state of terror, and her husband wanted to cheer her up and divert her attention. But now they had a very different taste because he was a simple man and she was ostentatious. And so he thought that Faberge could figure out a way to create a gift that would match both their tastes. And that was the hen egg. So, why eggs? Well, for 19th century Orthodox Christians, Easter was the Holy of Holies on the religious calendar. So, after 7 weeks of fasting, in which they had abstained from consuming any meat, milk, eggs, butter, or cheese, on Easter Day, the fasting finally ended. And so relatives and friends would greet each other with the traditional 3 kisses. And then they would say, "Christ is risen. He's risen indeed." And then in a ritual that dates back to pagan times, they would exchange eggs. And eggs, it also has its roots a little bit in the story of Mary Magdalene and Emperor Tiberius. I'm not going to go into that because it's not relevant to this topic. And so, Tsar Alexander III in 1885 had asked his brother, Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, to instruct Faberge to create a jeweled egg for the Tsarina, Maria Fedorovna. So at the Danish royal court, there was this beautiful ivory egg, and it had this beautiful ruby in it, and this miniature imperial crown, and this gold hen. So it's an egg that she knew very well from her childhood. And so Faberge used it as a prototype for her very first egg. And he was paid 4,151 rubles for the hen egg, which was the equivalent of $2,000 at that time. And so on Easter morning, 1885, Alexander gave Maria a simple enamel egg. It looked like a duck egg. And then it had a little band of gold in the middle here. And so she twisted that. This is the actual hen egg. So she twisted that and found this golden yolk in it. She opened this and then found this hen sitting on a nest of golden straw. And inside of the hen was a miniature imperial crown in gold and diamonds. And inside of that was a large ruby pendant, just like the one we just saw. And so imagine how elated she must have been, because the egg reminded her of her carefree past and her famously happy childhood in Denmark. So did it have the desired effect? Well, on May 1st, 1885, 6 weeks after Alexander had given Maria the egg, the imperial court issued an announcement that said, quote, "His Majesty the Emperor has granted his supreme permission to St. Petersburg Second Guild jeweler Karl Faberge with a store at number 18 Bolshaya Morskaya to bear the title supplier to the imperial court, with the right to bear the state coat of arms in his shop sign. And with that royal seal of approval, Faberge's formal relationship with the Tsars had begun." So, according to the archives, In 1886, there was a second hen egg made, which had a gold hen holding a sapphire egg in its beak over a gold and diamond basket. Uh, that's one of the missing eggs. And unfortunately, we do not have even a pictorial representation of what it looked like. After Alexander requested the third egg in 1887, the orders just became automatic. So in 1887, this is what she received: the third imperial egg, which was once missing but has since been found. And now I'm going to share a short video about its rediscovery.
Made entirely of gold, encrusted with sapphires and diamonds, this Faberge egg is remarkable, but so is the story behind it.
There are perhaps no objects as romantic as Imperial Faberge Easter eggs.
Created by Karl Faberge in 1887 for the Russian royal family, it was seized during the revolution and sold by the Soviets. It vanished for half a century. That was until an American man bought it at a junk auction in the Midwest for $14,000. He wanted to melt it down, but instead contacted Faberge expert Karen McCarthy.
A gentleman had it, the most unassuming, modest person you could imagine, and he walked up to my desk, which is in this room, and presented me with a sheaf of photographs in which there were pictures of this, one of the greatest pieces of gold work ever to be created.
The egg has already been sold, reportedly for $30 million. McCarthy wouldn't confirm that, but he says another inferior Faberge egg went for $18 million.
To find one of them is the luck of not just one lifetime, but 1,000 lifetimes, and he had found one. These are the things we hunt all day, every day, and to be presented with one was the most sort of spine-tinglingly exciting moment.
The egg goes on display in London from April 14th. There are another two missing from this very same collection. They're out there somewhere waiting to be found. Angus Bennett, Bloomberg.
Okay. So the eggs were always made in complete secrecy. Not even the Tsar knew anything about them until they were delivered to him. The instructions from the Tsar were all given to Faberge through a committee of ministers. There was way too much protocol about who could talk directly to the Tsar. And it's incredible, because if you listen to the stories, about the eggs, they seem to have these very personal touches. You'd think that Faberge had a very close relationship with them, but he didn't. Which just makes his creations all the more impressive, to me at least. Anyway, this cramped Faberge's creativity. So imagine how much better they could have been. But as things progressed, he was given greater freedom. And eventually the Tsar gave only 3 stipulations. Each of them must be egg-shaped. Each one must be different and unique. And each one must contain a surprise. So, in 1888, it is said that Maria got the cherub with chariot egg. Its whereabouts are unknown, and only this drawing of it exists. Set up and made from gold, with an angel pulling an egg, which contained a clock. So, Faberge always addressed these, when he was delivering them, he always addressed them to His Majesty, the Tsar of all Russians. This is going to, you're going to see the importance of this in the end. The relevance will come to light. So moving on, in 1889, Maria received the Necessaire egg. Its whereabouts are also unknown, but also made from gold and various precious stones, and it was said to have contained ladies' toiletries in gold. And then in 1890, she was given the Danish palace's egg. This one. A Louis XVI style egg of gold and precious stones, and inside it was a gold screen with 10 paintings of palaces and homes that she had grown up in. So, in all this time, Faberge's business had taken off on steroids. He had been appointed as an appraiser of the imperial court. In other words, he was being recognized as a favorite jeweler of the imperial family. He was making cutlery sets, trinkets, carved animals, cigarette cases, and snuff boxes. Nobles and middle-class families bought his wares. His creations were so popular that families no longer set the table for dinner, they set the Faberge. The demand for his creations got so high that he had to open a second location in Moscow, and he delegated projects to his trusted workmasters like Mikhail Perkins, the guy who produced over half of the Imperial Eggs. That's Mikhail. So Faberge designed them, and he sourced the materials, and he also marketed the finished products. But this is the man who did the actual work, creating them. So his workers were all specialists, and they even knew how to change the color of gold to whatever they wanted. So a lot of the eggs you'll be seeing tonight are actually gold, but you wouldn't know from the colors. And it was the same thing with enamel. While his competitors could produce 3, maybe 4 other colors of enamel at best, Faberge was producing over 100 different colors. His real genius lay in harnessing the talent and creativity of others. And best of all, he knew how to make a profit without overcharging. He always charged the Romanovs less than all the other jewelers did. And quality control was strictly managed by Faberge himself with a hammer. So if he liked an object, he said nothing. But if he didn't like it, he smashed it to smithereens with a hammer and then told the craftsman, "You can do better. Start again and do it right." So in 1890, Maria's son, Tsarevich Nicholas, or Nicky, was 22 years old. And he was completely smitten with a 17-year-old ballerina. And his parents wanted to put an end to it. And so they decided to send him on a 9-month tour abroad. And it was also going to be a chance for Nicky to meet the foreign dignitaries in preparation of his future. So his younger brother George and his other cousin George, who was Greek, accompanied him on this grand tour. And the vessel they traveled on was called Memory of Azov. So for Easter 1891, his mother Maria was given the Memory of Azov egg. And inside the egg was an exact replica of the vessel that her sons were traveling on. In fact, Faberge even included this, the ocean water. And she obviously missed her sons, and this reminded her of them, and she took this egg with her everywhere she went. Faberge benefited greatly from this voyage because Nicholas was expected to present all kinds of gifts to the world leaders he was meeting, from picture frames to clocks to snuff boxes, and Faberge created them all. So imagine having the heir to the throne as your brand ambassador. And Nicholas was almost murdered by a samurai while in Japan, but his cousin George saved his life. And actually, he had a scar on his cheek from the samurai sword. And because of this incident, he had a lifelong hatred of Japan and Japanese people. So he was more than happy to go to war with Japan as the enemy. So his brother George developed tuberculosis during this voyage and had to leave midway through. And he went to the Caucasus to recover. And when the voyage ended, Nikki returned to St. Petersburg and straight back to the arms of the ballerina. So 9 months we didn't work to separate them. Okay, in 1892, Maria received the diamond trellis egg. It was carved from jade, and the now missing surprise was a clockwork elephant made from ivory. And the relevance is that there is an elephant on the Danish family's coat of arms. So this was used to wind it, and the elephant would actually walk about. There's a surprise that was inside it, but it's now missing. Now, for 1893, Maria was given the Caucasus egg. Remember her son George? So he was the family joker. And they all adored him. The family missed it because he was still suffering from tuberculosis. And so he was exiled to a hunting lodge in the Caucasus so he wouldn't infect the rest of the family. And so the egg had paintings of all the houses where her son was staying, the lodges at the home in the Caucasus. Sadly, he did not survive. In 1894, Maria received the Renaissance egg. Stunning. And made from quartz and precious stones. The surprise is lost, but it is speculated that it's actually the so-called resurrection egg because it fits perfectly inside of it. So this used to be called the resurrection egg, obviously because, Easter and angels and the risen Christ. Beautiful egg. It fits perfectly inside of this. So it's speculated that it's actually the surprise. A spectacular one. So that Easter was also when Nicholas and his childhood crush decided that they would get married. So his parents had been opposed to the union because his childhood crush was Alex of Hesse. So she came from a lesser house. She was very superstitious. She was shy and she was awkward. But, she'd had a very sad childhood. She'd lost her mom and her siblings quite young, which made her a bit withdrawn. So, just kept to herself. And I think because she knew that his parents had been opposed to their union, that tension continued to exist. So even after their marriage, she and Maria Fedorovna never got along. Alexandra never adapted to Russia, and actually she was very disliked by the Russians. And so for their engagement, Nicholas got Alexandra a gorgeous pearl and diamond necklace from Faberge, and his parents also got her a sautoir of pearls, with each one of the pearls hand-selected by Faberge himself. In fact, it's the most expensive thing he ever created. The most expensive thing Faberge ever created, that she wore to her wedding. And this was her first exposure to Jules, because she came from a very small royal family. Anyway, so Tsar Alexander III had found out that he had an incurable kidney disease, and he knew he was dying. And so he wanted Nicholas married before he ascended to the throne. But sadly, this was not to be, because even though his parents agreed to let him marry Alexandra, his father's health just didn't cooperate with them. His father died, sadly, on the 20th of October, 1894. And they got married 1 week after the funeral. Perhaps why she looks so sad in this wedding photo. And in fact, she said that the only difference between her father-in-law's funeral and her wedding day is that she wore a white dress. And also the Russian population just felt that it was bad luck because, as they said, she came to us behind a coffin. So it felt like a continuation of her father-in-law's funeral. And around the same time, even Faberge's father, Gustav, had died. His father died in 1893. So now Tsar Alexander had died, and Faberge did not know Nicholas's taste yet. But he observed that Nicholas disliked change, and that Nicky planned to emulate his late father in all things. The thing is, change was extremely slow at the palace. And in fact, Nicholas once complained about how even a request to change the color of one pair of his tennis socks required the involvement of 10 different officials. So he just decided he was going to leave things just as they were because it was just going to take too long to change anything. And he adored his mother. He loved her very deeply, took very good care of her. In fact, when they got married, they lived with her for the first few months of marriage. Jewels were important to his mother, and so for her sake, he decided to continue with the tradition of giving her a Faberge egg each Easter. And for his wife's sake, he doubled the order. And so in 1895, when Maria Fedorovna was receiving her 11th Faberge egg, Alexandra also received her first Faberge egg. So Maria's 11th Faberge egg and first egg from her son was the blue serpent clock egg. There has been some confusion about this one. It was once thought to be the third egg, and there are lots of different theories which I'm not going to go into. It was created with no surprise, and this one is now owned by Prince Albert of Monaco. And actually a similar one was created for Consuelo Vanderbilt. Now, Alexandra's first Faberge egg was the rosebud egg, which was relatively small. So it was red and contained this yellow enameled rosebud because Alexandra missed the rose gardens of her homeland. And in Germany, yellow was regarded as the noblest color for a rose. And so inside this rosebud was an imperial crown and a ruby pendant, similar to the one that Maria had gotten in her first egg, in her hen egg. Also the imperial crown. Yeah. So some people think it was in bad taste to present her with the gift in such bold and bright colors when the family was obviously in mourning for her late father-in-law. And Faberge was a very smart man, a very forward-thinking man. He knew of the tensions between the Dowager Empress, Maria Fedorovna, and Alexandra, who was going to become the new Tsarina. And he wanted to have a happy and lucrative business relationship with the new Tsarina. He was a practical man. It was a business decision. He wasn't going to antagonize one over the other in the name of loyalty. So it is not known what Alexandra thought of the egg, but she kept it in her study at St. Petersburg, a place where they rarely stayed at, unless it was winter time. The home they really loved was called Tsarskoye Selo, the Tsar's village. It was this beautiful village that consisted of several imperial residences. So all palaces and imperial residences and entertainment pavilions all over this town. And so they could choose whichever one they wanted to anytime they were going there on holiday. Even the Catherine Palace that contained the legendary Amber Room was there. But they chose to live in the more modest Alexander Palace. It was surrounded by a park full of trees and studded with ponds. And as teens, they had both scratched their names on a window pane there in diamonds, as was the usual custom. So they loved that. So in 1896, Alexandra received the rock crystal egg with the surprise clearly visible inside it. It was a revolving miniature with paintings of all the German and English palaces she had frequented all her life. And Maria received the Alexander III portrait egg, also known as a 12 monogram egg. And it had monograms of herself and her late husband in them. And the surprise was to have been a portrait of her late husband. In 1897, Alexandra got the coronation egg. So this one was made in honor of their joint coronations as Emperor and Empress in 1896. The egg was made from red gold and covered in an opalescent yellow enamel to emulate the golden robe she wore at the coronation. And the surprise is this, an exact replica of the coronation coach that she rode in. That is the actual coronation coach. And the replication was so exact that at some point when this coach needed to be repaired, the people consulted this which Faberge had created. It's just incredible to me what this man did. So this coronation was not a very happy day for Alexandra for several reasons. This is a picture of her riding in the coronation coach. She hated the carriage ride to the coronation because most of the people were cheering not for her and Nicholas, who were being, elevated to Tsar and Tsarina. They were cheering for her mother-in-law, Maria. And she had had a miscarriage around the time of the coronation. And she believed that it was a boy she'd lost. And, she desperately wanted a son because only a boy could inherit the throne. And as she wasn't really well liked by the Russian people, as evidenced in this next, so this is a portrait that was done of their coronation. And you can see, this color matches the eggs. This is what they wore. So that's the Tsar. That's the Tsarina. That's the mother-in-law, the Dowager Empress, with the shining crown. Just shows how much she was loved. She's the one glowing in this portrait. Anyway, also following the coronation, there had been a stampede in which up to 5,000 people had perished. And following this, Nicholas had very unwisely gone on to attend a ball hosted by the French ambassador that same night. And many Russians never forgave him for not canceling his attendance. Okay, so that same year, Marie received the mauve egg. And the surprise that was inside of it was a heart-shaped photo frame that opened up as a 3-leaf clover. So this is the surprise that was inside of it. So it contained pics of Alexandra and Nicholas's and the Grand Duchess's Olga. And the egg itself is missing. But well, this was a surprise that was inside of it. Okay. So in 1898, Maria received the pelican egg. That's pelican feeding her young there. So it was made from engraved red gold and had a pelican in a nest mounted on top. It's a symbol of maternal care. And the surprise was 8 oval miniature paintings of charities that Maria had patronized. And Alexandra received the lilies of the valley egg, made in pink enamel with pearls as the flowers and green gold as the leaves. And these things that look like dewdrops here, they're all diamonds. And then the surprise inside were 3 portraits: Nicholas, Olga, and Tatiana. In 1899, Maria got the pansy, or the spinach jade egg, made in nephrite. Nephrite and gold flowers. The surprise was a heart-shaped easel frame with a monogrammed M and 11 miniature portraits of the imperial family inside of it. That year, Alexandra received the Madonna lily clock egg. Made in enameled gold, diamonds, and onyx. It was wound with a gold key, and the surprise inside was set up in a ruby pendant with rose-cut diamonds. Now, in 1900, Alexandra received the Trans-Siberian Railway egg. This one. Russia had a booming economy and was emerging as an industrial power at this time. Russia had the fastest growing economy in Europe. So the egg had an engraving of the map of the train route and a Romanov eagle on top. And the surprise inside of it was a gold miniature train that was wound with this golden key. And it actually moved when it was wound with this. And Maria received the cockerel egg that year. This one. And the surprise was a cockerel that popped out on the top of it and moved around. Clear picture of the surprise. It just popped out when she pressed the button. So 1900 is also the first time that the world got to know of the Faberge eggs. because he, with the permission of both women, held his first ever exhibition in Paris. It was a smashing success. And a quote from a newspaper at the time said, Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI, where are they now? In St. Petersburg, for we now call them Faberge. He had attained full international recognition by this time. He was awarded the Knight's Cross of France's Légion d'honneur, and he held another one in 1902 in St. Petersburg. It was very popular. By this time, the highlight of a visit to St. Petersburg included a visit to Faberge's shop. He was that popular. This was when the eggs began to acquire that status as, the ultimate status symbol for imperial wealth. And this is when the J.P. Morgans and the Consuelo Vanderbilts and other rich Americans also began to order from Faberge. So, in 1901, Maria received the Gatchina Palace egg. It was made from pearl-encrusted gold, and inside it was a gold replica of her home. Faberge missed the mark with this one because this was a palace she hated living in. She just lived there because it's where her husband had made a family live. Alexandra got the flower basket egg. Made from enameled silver and 4,000 diamonds with trellis work. No information about the surprise that was inside of it. And 1901 was also the year when Alexandra had her fourth daughter. She was desperate for a son who could inherit the throne. And this desperation led her to be open to charlatans. There were 4 grand duchesses when they were younger. So she was so desperate to have a son that she went to all sorts of faith healers and charlatans. And she'd been introduced to a French mystic named Philippe. And he apparently predicted the birth of her son in 1902, before he died. But he died before Alexei was born in 1904. And prior to this Philippe's death, he had told Alexandra that she would meet another very powerful mystic. And this prediction came true, because this person turned out to be Grigory Rasputin. So moving on, in 1902, Maria got the Empire Nephrite egg, carved from a single block of Siberian nephrite and adorned with gold. This one was a commemoration of her daughter Olga's engagement to Prince Peter of Oldenburg. And Alexandra received a clover leaf egg. Beautiful. Made from green gold, diamonds, and rubies. The surprise is lost, but it was speculated to have been a large 4-leaf clover with miniature portraits of the Grand Duchesses. In 1903, Maria was given the Royal Danish egg, which is missing. That's a picture of it. So it was light blue in color, made of light blue enamel and gold and precious stones. And the surprise was a portrait of Maria's parents. Her father had been king of Denmark for 40 years at that time. Alexandra got the Peter the Great egg. It was made from red, green, and yellow gold, platinum, and various precious stones. And the surprise inside it was a miniature of Peter the Great's monument on the Neva River. With this one, Faberge also missed the mark because Nicholas often said, quote, Peter is the ancestor who appeals to me least of all. And there's 1903 on it in diamonds. So no eggs were created in 1904 or 1905 because Russia and Japan were at war. But in 1904, Alexandra finally produced an heir, Alexei, and he was more valuable than any Faberge egg, more valuable than all the Faberge eggs combined. So in 1906, Maria was given the swan egg, this one, made from gold and enamel and diamonds. And the surprise was this miniature gold and silver swan on a lake. This is the lake. And so the swan sat in the basket. And the swan's neck and wings actually move. Alexandra got the Moscow Kremlin egg, which is a replica of the Dormition Cathedral. And the surprise was a built-in gold music box that plays part of an Easter hymn. It's the most expensive one of all the Imperial eggs that Faberge ever created. It also had the year 1904 engraved on it. So it was not the greatest year for them politically, but as a family, it was a pretty amazing year for them. And it's possible that Faberge was not expecting the order to create this one. So in 1907, Maria received the cradle with garlands egg. The surprise is missing, but it's supposedly miniatures of the imperial children. And Alexandra got the rose trellis egg. Beautiful. And the surprise was a diamond necklace with an ivory miniature of the Tsarevich, her son. So Alexei inherited hemophilia from his mom, but it was a well-guarded state secret. Not even his grandmother knew about it. In fact, the rest of the imperial family did not know. And it's amazing because Faberge knew that Alexei was a bleeder, just a testament to how well connected he was. And so from the year that Alexei was born, and for the next 10 years, Faberge avoided the use of the color red in any of his eggs. You know, when the family eventually found out that he had hemophilia, they were so stunned that Nicholas's brother immediately eloped with an unsuitable woman because he wanted to avoid ever inheriting the crown. Anyway, back to the eggs. So in 1908, Alexandra received the Alexander Palace egg, which was made from nephrite and decorated with portraits of her 5 children. And the surprise inside was this. I'll show you a better picture of it. This replica of the Alexander Palace, including the gardens where they lived. They loved that home very much, so this one was a hit. And Maria received the peacock egg. It's so beautiful. So it was made from rock crystal on a gold mount and inscribed with her monogram. And inside, the peacock in the gold tree is able to turn its head and spread its tail feathers. Then in 1909, Alexandra received the standard yacht egg. Made from rock crystal on a lapis lazuli stand. Inside it was a replica of the Tsar's yacht. At that time, it was the biggest yacht in the world. It had 30 luxurious rooms, a chapel, and a cow stable. Nicholas and Alexandra loved this yacht and took a 6-week holiday on it every summer with their family and their friends. It's one of the only times when the family ever had any privacy. And so they really enjoyed it. They reveled in it. So Maria received the Alexander III commemorative egg. And it had a miniature gold bust of her husband inside of it. It's one of the missing ones. Next year, 1910, Alexandra was given the colonnade egg in pink enamel. And so these 4 golden girls below represent the Grand Duchesses, her daughters. And the winged cupid on the top represents Alexei the Tsarevich. And this egg really represented the reality of their lives. Alexei's sisters absolutely worshipped him. He was beyond spoiled, rotten. So Maria was given the Alexander III equestrian egg. Beautiful. And inside of it was a very large one, carved from topaz in a platinum frame. And inside is a replica of a monument that had been erected in her late husband's honor. So around this time, Rasputin had entered the life of the imperial family because Alexei, due to his condition, was almost as fragile as an egg. Something as simple as bumping into furniture would bruise him and cause internal bleeding and intense pain for weeks. And so Alexandra came to depend on Rasputin because he always knew how to make her son feel better. But the general public didn't know about that, and people wondered why she was always around this strange mystic. So around this time, Faberge had a new class of clients. They were entrepreneurs and the newly wealthy. And he came to enjoy working for them more because they paid him well and they let him know exactly what they wanted because he could actually talk to them. By contrast, the imperial court never wanted to pay full price. They haggled with him endlessly and they hampered his creativity because he mostly had to rely on guesswork. He didn't know what they liked because he was never allowed to actually talk to the people who was creating the eggs for. And actually, Faberge came to feel contempt for the imperial family. But luckily, this isn't reflected in the eggs. So in 1911, Alexandra got the 15th anniversary egg. In honor of their 15 years on the throne. It was decorated with portraits of the family and highlights of their reign. There was no surprise made for it. And Maria received the bay tree egg. So, made from gold, diamonds, and pearls. And the surprise inside of it was a mechanical singing bird. In 1912, Maria received the Napoleonic egg. Faberge got to personally deliver this egg to her because Nicholas and Alexandra were on holiday in Livadia. So it's made from gold and 4,500 diamonds. And the surprise inside of it was a folding screen with pictures of the regiments she had presided over. And Alexandra got the Tsarevich egg. This one. Carved from a single block of lapis lazuli and gold. And the surprise inside was a miniature portrait of Alexei set in platinum and 2,000 diamonds. He was the favorite child and the only hope for succession. And so this gift was centered just around him. And as stated earlier, Rasputin was in their lives and it was causing lots of trouble. There were rumors spreading about them by now, especially about the closeness of Alexandra and Rasputin, true and false rumors. And Maria had warned them about it. The thing is, Alexandra lived in constant terror of losing her only son. And so she desperately clung to Rasputin. And people just didn't understand why. Until 1912, when he nearly died. And Rasputin from Siberia had sent a message to Alexandra telling her that the little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much. And Alexei inexplicably survived. So now that the situation was public knowledge, Faberge stopped making eggs with Alexei as the main theme. This was the last one he ever made with Alexei as the main theme. Now, 1913 marked 300 years of Romanov rule. And so for that year, Alexandra received the Romanov tercentenary egg. So it's decorated with portraits of several Romanov tsars. And this is the surprise that was inside of it. I'll show you a picture of it closed in a minute. So this was a visual embodiment of their 300 years in power. And this is what the egg looks like closed. More egg-like. And Maria received the winter egg. It was made from rock crystal and diamonds. And the surprise inside it was a platinum diamond encrusted flower basket. This was the first Faberge egg designed by a woman. In February 1914, Alexandra got Prime Minister Kokov fired because he was opposed to Rasputin. And in a conversation that her mother-in-law Maria had with the newly fired Prime Minister, she told him, "My daughter-in-law doesn't like me. She thinks I am jealous of her power, and yet I see we are nearing some catastrophe, and the Tsar listens to no one but flatterers, not observing or suspecting what is happening around him." Around this time, the hatred for the Tsar and his family was growing, but they were blissfully unaware of it. Anyway, so for Easter 1914, Alexandra received the mosaic egg. It was also designed by the same woman, Alma Phil. I'll show you a picture of her soon. Made from gold, platinum, and an array of precious stones in a floral tapestry. And this one is one of the most complex Faberge eggs created. And actually, the man who created it, he nearly went mad because he had to make all these precious stones fit perfectly. No easy feat. So this is the surprise that was inside of it. A miniature frame with the profiles of her 5 children on it. And Maria received the Catherine the Great egg. First, okay, this is the woman who designed the egg, Alma Phil. So that's the Catherine the Great egg in pink enamel. And the surprise was a miniature of Empress Catherine sitting on a sofa carried by 2 servants. And they walked if you wound it up. Let me show you the surprise. Maria absolutely loved it. She told Faberge that he was an unparalleled genius. And then, of course, World War I broke out later that year, 1914. And so the orders for Faberge products dried up and he had to adapt. So he adapted by producing cheaper objects made from copper and other low-value materials. And this time, however, the eggs were not cancelled. So in 1915, both empresses who had both worked with the Red Cross and looked after wounded soldiers received Red Cross themed eggs. In fact, Maria had been president of Russia's Red Cross since her husband's reign, and she refused to relinquish the position. This was another thing that caused tension between her and Alexandra. And so they both got variations of the Red Cross egg. Maria got Red Cross with Imperial Portraits egg, made from silver enamel with her monogram and 2 Red Crosses. And the surprise with miniature portraits of 5 Romanov women in Red Cross uniforms. And Alexandra got this Red Cross with triptych. And the surprise was a triptych of powerful Orthodox saints. And shortly after Easter that same year, the war was going so badly for Russia that Nicholas decided to assume direct command at the front. And so he would be leaving leadership of the empire in the capable hands of Alexander and the guidance of Rasputin. Faberge was making munitions for the army at this time, and actually many of his workers had gotten conscripted to go fight in the war. So Easter 1916 was the first time that Nikki and Alexandra were ever apart at Easter time. Nicholas was, of course, at the front with Alexei. So Alexandra received the steel military egg. It was made from a dull blackened steel, and the surprise was a miniature painting of Nikki and Alexei looking over maps along with some army officers. And Maria was given the Cross of St. George egg. It was in commemoration of the award of the same name which had been given to Nicholas that year. And it was made from silver with paintings of the award on it. And the surprise was a mini portrait of Nicholas and Alexei, along with a badge. So these were the last 2 eggs that were successfully completed and delivered. So Nicholas was at the front, engaged in the war against Germany, and he had left his German wife, Alexandra, in charge of the empire. And his German wife and her confidant Rasputin were giving him advice on military strategy and on whom to hire and whom to fire. What could possibly go wrong? Well, let me tell you. Alexandra changed 4 prime ministers, 3 ministers of war, 4 ministers of agriculture, and 5 ministers of the interior in 1 year. She paralyzed the government. Maria was so disgusted that she moved to Kiev. Most Russians just distrusted Alexandra and her motives because she was German, and they despised Rasputin. And so, on December 16th, 1916, Rasputin was eliminated. And actually, even Faberge himself came under suspicion as a spy during the war. He was even placed under surveillance because of his international connections and his perceived closeness with the imperial family. In any case, the Russian Revolution began properly on February 23rd, 1917, when the army mutinied. And on March 2nd, that same year, 1917, Nicholas was forced to abdicate, and he removed his son from the line of succession. His brother Michael turned down the offer to become Tsar, and so the Romanov dynasty's rule came to an end that year. So for 1917, Faberge had been working on the birch egg for Maria and the constellation egg for Alexandra. He only completed the birch egg. And this is the only egg that was ever made from organic material because it was made from wood. I guess because, austerity measures with the war and everything. So, now that Nicholas was no longer Tsar, on April 25th, when Faberge sent Nicholas the invoice, for the first time, he addressed him not as Tsar of all the Russian, but simply as Mr. Romanov. So the egg was sent to Maria, but it never reached her. So the surprise in this one was a mini diamond-encrusted elephant. Another homage to her Danish roots because of the elephant on the flag. Anyway, so when the let me show you the constellation egg that was never completed that he was making for Alexandra. So when the imperial family left Petrograd on a train headed for Siberia, Alexandra left all her Faberge eggs behind her. So in 1918, that Easter, the family received chicken eggs that were donated to them by the people of the town of Tobolsk. And so they got to paint those eggs that Easter. No fancy eggs. And of course, they were all murdered in July of 1918. But we're not going to talk about that. So, 2 of Faberge's sons were arrested by the Bolsheviks in October of 1917, and they were eventually released, and they fled the country. In February 1918, some of Lenin's commissars arrived to take over Faberge's business. And so they just stormed in and told him they were taking over. And he asked them for 10 minutes to put on his coat and his hat. And he said goodbye to his 50-year-old business. Had 10 minutes to say goodbye to it. In September 1918, Faberge was able to flee from Russia. He moved around Europe for a few years, and he eventually settled in Switzerland, where he died on the 24th of September 1920. He never recovered from the demise of the Romanovs. So the Bolsheviks sold off many of his creations. Even Maria had left most of her eggs at the Gatchina Palace. And after Nicholas had been forced to abdicate, his mother, Maria, had fled to the Crimea, taking a huge jewelry box with her. On April 26, 1917, the villa she was staying at got stormed by Bolshevik sailors, and they tore her bedroom apart. They even pulled out the floorboards. And all the time when they were in her room, her jewelry box was in full view throughout. But they inexplicably never even looked at it. It was right there and they didn't see it. Eventually, King George V sent a ship to rescue Maria from Russia, and she was able to flee on April 8th, 1919. She left on a ship and she left behind 54 chests full of jewelry. And till her dying day, she never believed that her son and his family had been assassinated. For the rest of her life, she hoped they had escaped somehow. She died on October 13th, 1928. And for the rest of her life, she'd actually kept that jewelry box under her bed, hoping that she'd be reunited with her family. So now let's talk about where the eggs are now. So there are 10 of the Faberge eggs at the Kremlin Armory Museum. There are 9 of them at the Links of Time Museum in St. Petersburg. There are 13 at various US museums. There were 3 that were owned by the late Queen Elizabeth, who probably now inherited by King Charles. There's 1 owned by Prince Albert of Monaco. There are 7 held by private collectors. And there are 7 whose whereabouts are unknown, but are coming into my possession as we speak. So, Malcolm Forbes once owned 10 of them, but he sold them to Victor Vekselberg, a Russian tycoon. So he brought those ones back to Russia, returned them back to the homeland. And Russian presidents still use the eggs as a get-out-of-jail-free card in international diplomacy, as we already mentioned. It's amazing how this man's creations hold such importance to this day, even after he and people he created them for have since died. So why are Faberge pieces so valuable and highly coveted? They're not all luxury goods. After all, his stock in trade was mostly enamel and hard stones rather than diamonds and rubies. But his clientele, he supplied his creations to the aristocracy of Europe's golden age. And as Queen Mary of England once remarked, quote, "There is one thing about all Faberge pieces. They are so satisfying. It's the craftsmanship and the attention to detail." That's one of the reasons. But I think mostly it's because of the Imperial eggs. Because even the replicas have a booming market of their own, thanks to the reflected glory. The eggs overshadow the over 150,000 other unique objects that Faberge designed and created. You know, in 2006, the British model Kate Moss was caught smuggling drugs in a 65,000-pound replica egg. And that's a replica that costs that much. So the story behind each egg is unique, and the mystique about the missing eggs also add to their appeal. And another thing that makes them so highly coveted is the sheer extravagance of some of them, because it symbolizes the opulence of the Russian imperial court, and the fact that they've been bought and sold by monarchs and oligarchs and collectors all over the world. Okay, so now to finish up, I'm going to play a video showing you how Faberge eggs are created nowadays. And then I'll show you some of those pictures I was telling you about of other things he created, non-egg items. So let's see how a Faberge egg is created now by the Unilever Group. Okay, now let me show you some other pictures of other items he created for the imperial family. So this was a decanter. This was a cufflinks he made. So at many of these imperial balls, women had these little notebooks in which they wrote down the names of people they were going to dance with. And this is one that Faberge had created for Alexandra. There's some of the jewels he made for them for state occasions. And so is this one. This was a 25th anniversary gift he'd made. These are supposed to be 25 angels. In my opinion, it's not his best work. This was a champagne bucket, which he'd made for Maria's father. This was a cigarette lighter. And this is the only thing that survived from the Ipatiev house where they were killed. They had this with them. It's the only thing the Bolsheviks didn't manage to take from them. It's amazing how even to their death, they took a piece. They took a piece of Faberge with them. I think they had a very remarkable relationship. Anyway, so that's all for now. Come to the end of this presentation. I had a lot of fun researching it, and I hope you liked it. And I'll see you at the next one. Ciao.